Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics. We are three film geeks discussing movies, both new and old. I'm Dan.
I'm Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week we're going to review new releases, including Joseph Gordon-Levitt's directorial debut, Don Jon, among some others. Our top 5 this week is about the 3D experience and which films did it best. Our new classic this week is political drama, The Ides of March. We've got our old classic, which was chosen by me this week, the Mike Judge film Extract. And our Oscar nominee A to Z film this time is 1981's Absence of Malice, starring Paul Newman and Sally Field. First up on the show this week, we're going to touch on something we started to talk about on last week's show. Justin and I had seen The Wizard of Oz re-release in the IMAX 3D, and we were all discussing re-releases in general. And we touched on the 3D aspect specifically, so I wanted to expand on that a little bit. And in our top 5 later in the show, like I said, we're going to talk about what movies used 3D to their best advantage. But a lot of people have been getting sick of the 3D experience and paying more money for it. And in its heyday a couple years ago, just to sort of give a level here, a movie's 3D take on opening weekend would routinely be at least 60% in 3D ticket sales. And as an even further yardstick, Avatar's opening weekend was 71% from 3D showings. Now this summer the format has hit new lows, including for animated feature with Monsters University and for an action film with World War Z, hitting just 31 and 34% respectively with 3D in their opening weekends. Personally, I am a 3D fan. But Joe, I know you don't care much for the medium, so let's hear from you first about this.
To be honest, it's not that I don't care for it completely. I actually think 3D can be really good when it's implemented well, and used specifically with certain films. I think 3D can really add to the experience. Don't get me wrong, but I think when it's slapped onto pretty much anything just to increase ticket sales, that's just bad delivery overall. And that's my biggest problem with it. I mean, I do enjoy 3D on some occasions, but I think that the fact that numbers are dropping is a good indicator of how people are feeling about this. It's a perfect example of basically doing too much can kind of wear things out. So if they just kind of bring it out once in a while, it could be good. They don't have to drop it entirely, but yes, 3D kind of is losing some popularity, and I can see why.
Are you more of the thought that this is really just a cash grab from studios and we'll tack it on to the movie just to make a little bit more profit?
If certain films, like some we'll probably be mentioning later, are kind of made with it in mind, I don't think so. But for the majority of the time, yes, because that's kind of what brought the fad on. People saw that Avatar did really well, and so, case in point, everybody want to jump on that ship, and it's kind of really worn it down. I think it's showing.
And I think, for me personally, like I said, I love 3D when it is done well. I think there's a lot of movies that even when the movie stinks, a 3D can at least increase a little bit. Like R.I.P.D. this summer was a good example of that. The 3D in it was really cool. They utilized it well. The movie was a stinker, but I did grade it slightly higher because I thought the 3D was well done.
But I bet your grading didn't really bring it up dramatically.
It brought it up just an inch. It brought it up from a D to a D+.
I think that 3D basically can add a little spice into something, but I don't think it's a really determining factor in how good a film is.
It's not, but it is, I mean, it's something along the lines of like a cinematography. Mm-hmm. Like if a movie has great cinematography, I think that can increase it a little bit, but I think 3D is part of that.
Well, I don't know if I feel comfortable putting 3D right alongside cinematography, because cinematography really is camera work, which is a huge part of the film experience, at least how it looks visually. 3D is part of that, but 3D isn't like completely part of the film like 100% of the time.
No, but I mean, they use 3D cameras. So, yeah, cinematography is camera work, but so is adding 3D.
It is, but
when it's filmed in 3D. I think that's my biggest problem with 3D, is when it's retrofit. Anything that's re-released, obviously, is retrofit because it wasn't filmed in 3D originally. But when you sit side by side a movie like Gulliver's Travels or Clash of the Titans that was recorded in 2D, filmed in 2D, I should say, and then they added in the 3D later, you can always tell because there's no depth. I don't know. Justin, what do you think about the whole thing?
I think there's one very big issue that comes up with 3D. When it's done well, it's exceptional. It's a very good stylistic, almost the actual proponent in which the audience almost feels like they're getting a whole 360-degree look at the world they're viewing. Mm-hmm. And I really respect that. But the big issue with this is the fact that it takes a lot of time to do it well, and it takes a lot of money, both of which make it a little bit of a concern for general audiences. When it comes together, it's well worth shelling out the extra money to see, obviously with Avatar and a couple other ones that we'll be talking about later on in the podcast. But movie studios are kind of like kids with toys in the matter. They want to get it out, they want to get it out fast. With 3D, at least at this point, you can't do that. And because of that, we get post-conversion messes like the 3D version of Star Trek Into Darkness, like World War Z, Clash of the Titans, that don't really help you respect that stylistic component that can really bring a movie to life, regardless of whether or not it's good narratively speaking. And because of that, it feels sometimes like a fad and a waste of money, which honestly it is. I think in terms of 3D, they need to learn to make better use of the technology. They need to learn to take their time with it, or at least find a way to speed it up instead of relying solely on post-conversion. If that's the case, maybe there is still hope for 3D, but I think audiences are really sick of just getting a very cheap product and would rather have something that's much more fulfilling, like Avatar or something along those lines.
Well, the only thing I think that's going to make 3D really stand the test of time, I mean, studios are going to keep doing it regardless because it lines their pockets a little bit with some extra cash, but I think what they need to do is be more selective with it. And, every movie doesn't have to be in 3D, and I think that The Dark Knight Rises, for example, wasn't in 3D, I think was a bold statement. Because I think Christopher Nolan was like, look, not everything has to be in 3D. Would this look cool in 3D? Probably. But does it have to be in 3D? No. And, The Avengers is an example of a retrofit 3D. And, it was a little cool. But for the most part, I didn't think that it was anything that special. Same thing with Thor. And I think it depends on the movie studio. Like Star Trek Into Darkness, I actually thought the 3D was pretty decent for something not shot in 3D. So maybe Paramount spent a little bit of extra money going into that. And I think I said this before when we were talking about Titanic, but the Titanic 3D was by far, I thought, the best of the old movie being retrofitted for 3D. Jurassic Park didn't really add much. We talked last week about how Wizard of Oz really didn't add much. But Titanic, I mean, James Cameron is the master of 3D, let's face it. He invented, some of the technology even for Avatar. So he spent, well, not he personally, but the company spent $18 million to convert the old Titanic print into 3D. And I think it worked. It wasn't as good as something shot in 3D, obviously, but there's an example of a product that actually can be retrofit well. And I think most of the time that's not what happens. And people just are sick of spending the extra money to get burned on it. What do you think of animation with 3D?
That's actually a good point. I think that when it comes to animation, it can actually be utilized, I think, even better, to be honest, because it already kind of has like a potential for more colorful nature. So I actually do tend to like animated 3D stuff, though I admit I haven't seen too many films that were animated. But I'd say that I've actually had more positive experiences with animation than without it, like live action.
I've had a little bit of good and bad with both. It seems easy to say that it would be better with animation, just because it's already studio made, so it's easier to figure out where to put it easily. 2 animated movies are on my top 5 list. I won't tell what they are just yet, obviously, but I think it really depends on what it is and how they're using it. Some animated movies work with just the general atmosphere complementing it. Other times it just sort of feels tacked on. Like, for example, Puss in Boots, honestly, 3D did nothing for me. It just felt gimmicky.
Luckily, we work in a theater, so we get free movies, so I always opt for the 3D because I enjoy it. But if I did have to pay for 3D, I would be much more selective, especially after doing something like Monsters University in both 3D and 2D, and seeing that there's virtually, I'm not getting anything extra for, the tacked-on price.
And that's the kind of situation that really makes me angry. When I actually get the chance to see both versions and I notice no difference, that's an example of really, really poorly done quality. Like you're advertising something that's essentially not even there.
Right.
And that's infuriating to me because that's stealing people's money.
Right.
Movie tickets are expensive.
And I think that's why people are so down on it. Great Gatsby was a very, very low turnout for 3D. However, the 3D of it was really good, I thought. And unfortunately, people didn't want to pay the extra money for it because they've been burned on it too many times.
You know, there's a minor factor that we probably weren't going to bring up, but I'm just going to add it on. Some people visually get hurt and get headaches from 3D. I mean, I personally don't, but I know people that do. That could be a small factor as well.
I have a friend who has an eye issue, just general speaking, it's a lazy eye, and she cannot watch 3D movies because of how her eyes function.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right, for some people it's not even a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's move on from that for now. We'll go back to 3D in a little bit when we do our top 5. But let's talk about this week's new releases. First up is going to be Don Jon. Now, nobody had higher expectations for this film than me. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who was a writer-director for the very first time here, he's had a film in my year-end top 10 for each of the last 4 years. And since this is his only movie this year, it was his only chance to earn a spot on my top 10 for 2013. Sadly, this movie probably won't even make my top 100. Joseph Gordon-Levitt stars as John, a playboy who beds a new girl every couple of nights and is interested in very few things in life, but they do include his gym, his family, his church, and most importantly to him, his porn, which he is very addicted to. Now, early on in the film, he meets Barbara, played here by Scarlett Johansson, who he ends up falling very hard for, to everybody's surprise, most of all his own. She forbids him from watching porn anymore, and from there, their relationship basically becomes a lie. Now, for me, none of the characters here are particularly likable, and I don't do very well with movies where I can't find anybody to root for. John and his friends are all jerks. I thought Barbara was a spoiled princess. One of the only decent people in the whole movie is a woman from John's night class, played by Julianne Moore, who is, I think, great in pretty much everything, and she doesn't disappoint here either. But another problem I had with it was the movie basically just ends in a flash. Any sort of redemption or character development for the people I already think are unlikable goes by so fast that it doesn't make any difference. They don't really have time to develop because they spend the first hour and 25 minutes being the same, and then in the last 4 minutes maybe some redemption is possible, but at that point I've already checked out long ago. I also found Joseph's direction kind of spotty. He was trying a few different styles at once, I thought. There's definitely potential there for him as a director, but I don't think he's found his sweet spot yet. Now, it's not all bad. Here's some good about the movie. I thought the scenes with John's family, particularly his fights with his father, played by Tony Danza, they're some of the best scenes in the film. And I thought his interaction with the parents actually reminded me of the family dynamic from Silver Linings Playbook, which obviously I enjoyed very much, so I thought that was cool. His sister, however, played by Brie Larson, was a complete waste. She's texting literally the entire movie until she finally speaks a comment of wisdom at the end, like some sort of bizarro silent Bob. I thought the best part of the movie, though, and one of the reasons that Joseph Gordon-Levitt is one of my favorites working today, is that he is completely fearless. As writer and director, he could have gone a lot safer with some of the scenes and some of his choices, and he chose not to do that. Whether they all worked for me or not, I have a lot of respect for him for doing them. Overall, though, Don Jon was too much of a mixed bag for me to recommend, and I give it a C-. Justin?
Oh, wow. That was slightly above what I was expecting you were going to give it. Okay, so for directorial debut, Joseph Gordon-Levitt has quite a bit to learn, but he shows more than a little promise with this one. He tells what I think could be labeled a unconventional, and I quote here, love story. The film poses a main question of how we choose to love and feel comfortable. For example, John obviously relies on porn to feel comfortable. Barbara resorts to going to the movies repeatedly, and Julianne Moore's character focuses on human interaction. The result, honestly, I thought was a bit heavy-handed, but still somewhat kind of poignant on the matter. Joseph Gordon-Levitt kind of picks and chooses his directorial style from other directors. One that stuck out to me particularly was Aronofsky's Snorri cam effect from Requiem for a Dream, but I think it should serve as a decent stepping stone for him. My biggest gripe for this movie came on the fact that the ending just sort of felt slopped together. It felt like an epilogue when we were just starting to get into Act 3. Don Jon, flaws and all, still gets a B. Not great, not bad, but still worth a look if you're looking for something slightly different.
Joe, what'd you think?
Well, I was actually really impressed. I really enjoyed Don Jon. I thought it was a lot of fun. I really, really admired this movie because it focused on something I don't see a lot of movies focus on, and that's addiction, particularly addiction of porn. I've never seen another movie do that, and I thought that the description of a lot of the mentalities of the characters and some of the focusing on the subject matter seemed really relevant and very believable. And a lot of the characters, though admittedly some of them were very shallow, were very believable. And I think that just for character writing, that was one aspect of it that really, really shined for me. I do agree with you guys that some of the directorial choices were kind of sloppy, and you could see him kind of bouncing between different styles, but I did like the fact that it did kind of keep it weaving, and he was trying new things, and I wasn't bored with the movie. And I liked the fact that it was trying to show a really positive message about connection and love and kind of trying to break out of this routine. And I thought that Jon really grew as a character. And admittedly, it did take a while for us to get to know him, but that made him really believable so that when he did change, though it was gradual, I could see it. My biggest complaint with the movie was that it felt too short. Like Justin said, the third act was almost non-existent. It was starting to get really, really good and just felt like, wow, they could have added on another 15, 20 minutes. It would have really made the experience better. Still, overall, I thought it was a very enjoyable film. The acting was great, and I thought the writing was pretty solid for the most part, and the directing was pretty interesting too. I really think Joseph Gordon-Levitt did a pretty decent job for his first run, so I'm giving it a B+.
Slightly higher than I gave it.
Slightly. I mean, honestly, I'm so impressed. From the way you were talking about it, I thought you were going to give it a D or something, honestly.
Well, that's why I gave both sides of it. There were definitely things to like about it. And, I mean, don't you agree that Joseph Gordon-Levitt could have chosen a lot of safer routes with that? I mean, that was one of my favorite things about the movie.
Actually, it's funny. The first act of this movie, the first half hour, I thought, okay, this is really generic and boring and safe, and I'm like, I wasn't really that interested. But by the time we got to the second act, I was like, I'm curious where we're going, and by the third act, I saw real potential for gold. So it started off kind of...
Were it to exist.
Were it to exist.
Yes.
I mean, were it to exist. There was no gold here, but we had silver, in my opinion.
If I had been allowed some time to see these characters actually grow and it not just ended abruptly and credits roll, I might have found it to be a better story. Mm-hmm. But like I said, by the time that they were ready to start having some character development and stuff, the credits started rolling, and I just turned to my friend next to me and what just happened? That's not the end of the movie, and it was.
I will admit I was kind of taken aback by that as well. I did feel like, wow, that's really how they're going to end it, but I felt that it was also kind of open-ended, and that's one way you could sort of play it. And to be perfectly fair, sometimes in life, which this movie was trying to reflect, people don't develop, sadly. And a lot of the people in this environment weren't people that seemed abrupt to change. That was kind of one of the themes of the movie, is people getting stuck in a routine, having
I agree with
perspectives,
that. But I guess my point would be that in my real life, if I knew a person like that, mm-hmm. that refused to change who they were, I wouldn't have them in my life. And as such, I don't want to sit an hour and a half with a character on screen like that if I wouldn't spend any time with him in my real life.
I can understand that to getting behind a character that you like is, of course, an important part
I mean,
of the
that's not to say I would hang out with Hannibal Lecter, and obviously I love Silence of the Lambs.
Though he has a lot of development.
But he does.
Putting that aside, well, I would argue that at least Jon does develop a bit, and it's subtle. Like little things. When he engages with Julianne Moore's character, slowly, he stops watching porn. Like, for instance, when he's walking in the gym, normally he just goes, lifts the weights, and counts the Hail Marys. He decides, hey, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to go into that room and play basketball. Yes, it's small, but for him, I thought it was big because he's a simple-minded character.
It was. But it also happened about 6 minutes before the end of the movie.
And I was satisfied
and that was about the first thing.
I was satisfied by that change because I saw that he was going a direction. Mm-hmm. And I liked that. And to be perfectly honest, maybe I'm giving him a little bit of slack because it was his first movie. And I've seen much worse for directorial debuts.
Oh, sure.
So I really liked that. Like I said, there's a lot of potential, but I thought that, for me, it was sold. I felt it. And maybe it was subtle nuance, but I thought it was well executed.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to his second directorial effort. I will give Joseph Gordon-Levitt all the leverage in the world. I think he's one of the very few really triple threats out there. I mean, he is a singer, he's an actor, he's a writer. He's just very, very talented.
And he's a very likable person.
And he's likable, and as I said earlier, I mean, his last 4 or 5 movies have all been pretty solid.
Are you excited for Don Jon too?
I maybe if there's some character development in it, sure. If Julianne Moore's back, then sure. She was one of the best parts of the film.
If they can expand on that third act, I really honestly would hope they do, because there's a lot more for that story to go, I believe.
I'll tell you what, I would give Don Jon 2 a go for sure. I mean, I'm not averse to that. As long as Tony Danza is back as the dad also, he was great.
One quick thing. How did you feel Scarlett Johansson did? I thought she played
Scarlett Johansson actually did very, very well.
Quite despicable.
I hated her character, but she played the hell out of it. I did not like Scarlett Johansson about 5 years ago, and then once Iron Man 2 hit, then I turned around and said, okay, now I can sort of give her a chance.
She's getting better.
Avengers, she was really good in. The last few things I've seen her in, I really liked. It was just those first few movies I saw her in, Nanny Diaries and a couple of the Woody Allen things I did not care for. Justin, anything else to add on Don Jon?
I think you both hit on very good points. It's interesting that you brought up Don Jon 2. I was not thinking about that, but I think it would make for an interesting deleted scene, at least for the DVD. I'm very curious to see if, upon further reflection, if you actually adjust your grade, Dan. But honestly, given his repertoire, for just trying to do something new, Don Jon was pretty good. I mean, I won't say it was without flaws, but I was left content.
Well, by trying something new, do you mean directing?
I mean directing, yes.
Okay.
I
okay. Because I was going to say, one of the things Joe hit on, that it was rare for him to see a movie about a porn addiction. For you and I, we just saw Thanks for Sharing last week, which was a sexual addiction movie, and porn was a little bit involved in that. So, to me, that part wasn't specifically new, but I'll say the word fearlessness again. His fearlessness in tackling it, I thought was new.
I guess that's a big part of the reason I gave it a high grade, is because I thought that particular part of the story was very well executed, because it's such an uncomfortable subject matter, but he told it in a really true way, and
I agree.
I thought it was kind of classy and sophisticated despite it. Even though a little bit, some of the moments were gross, I thought it was... I wasn't really that flabbergasted by it. I enjoyed it.
Before we move on, do either of you agree that Brie Larson's character was 100% pointless? And I don't know if it was for comedic effect that she was always on her phone texting and not speaking, or...
The same way I've been talking about comfort with the other characters, I think the main point of hers was also she's seeking refuge in her phone the same way Joseph Gordon-Levitt is taking refuge in his porn. Do I think it lacked subtlety and was a little obnoxious, and the majority of us spent the entire movie waiting for her to do something? She eventually did. I thought her advice was good. I kind of wish there had been more to it and we had gotten to see more from her, but I wouldn't call her character necessarily pointless.
He pretty much hit on what I was going to say. I thought that one of the elements that they were going on was kind of this breakdown in communication of the family, just kind of limiting what people were saying, and her getting lost on the phone was basically her block she had to get past. And once again, I thought that her advice was very sound. I was very happy. I was smiling when she said what she said. And I agree with Justin. I'd say that her character wasn't entirely pointless, but much like pretty much everything else, I wish we'd gotten to see a little more of her.
Okay. We're going to move on now to a movie called The Spectacular Now, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
Alright, so this focuses on a teenager named Sutter, who seems to have it all. He's got a decent job, he's got a pretty good social life, and he loves to party. He just has 2 problems. He's lost his high school sweetheart, and he drinks to no end. Though after he passes out on the lawn of an intelligent introvert named Amy, Sutter may have an opportunity to try and get his life going in the right direction. Though whether or not he is manipulating Amy or actually starting to learn to fall for her is debatable. What I thought was really good about this movie was, in a lot of teen films, our protagonist is usually an outcast with sort of a unique philosophical insight. In this, we change that focus to the popular kid. And because of that, I think it's not only a breath of fresh air, but also one of the most frustratingly real aspects of the teen angst genre. He seems throughout the entire movie that it's all about him. Through little things that are sprinkled throughout it, we see that there might be more to that, and I think a lot of that's with his chemistry with Shailene Woodley, who plays Amy. I think the character of Sutter is going to both anger and frustrate audiences in terms of He's not always likable. He's very selfish. He's very self-centered. He does a lot of things that don't necessarily seem like the most rational, and obviously he drinks. Where he's getting this alcohol seems to be a complete and utter mystery because he says he's broke at least 6 times in the movie. But it's really something unique for me. And the big issue I had with this was, despite this kind of uniqueness that it has through the first and second acts, the way it chooses to wrap up seemed kind of familiar. I think it couldn't be helped just given the nature of the beast with this, but I just felt like it fizzled in the final minutes. It's still worth a watch. I still highly recommend it, but I feel like there could have been a little bit more to top this off. Spectacular now gets a B+. Dan?
Well, I thought there was fantastic storytelling here. I thought there was realism around every corner. These were real characters in real situations facing real life. Now, Sutter might seem like a jerk, and a lot of the time he is, but honestly, what high school boy isn't? Especially when they're completely unsure of themselves and are spending most of their time drinking their problems away. I know Sutters. I have known Sutters my whole life, and they're actually some of the most sympathetic characters because they're so good at their core. Sometimes it gets away from them because of all their other problems or self-doubt or what have you, and we sort of unfold some of Sutter's personal problems as the movie goes on. But he is a good guy. Shailene Woodley as Amy, she might not be as fantastic here as she was in The Descendants, one of my favorites from a couple years ago, but I also would not be surprised at all if she got maybe a Golden Globe nomination for the role. As an aside, Brie Larson is also in this movie. I think she had a lot more to do here than in Don Jon. She plays Sutter's ex-girlfriend. Her character isn't necessarily likable or unlikable. You kind of get where she's coming from with the breakup. She wanted somebody that was a little bit more serious. And Sutter, pretty much for the first half of the movie, seems like he's not really going anywhere. He has no interest in school. He's just sort of skating by in high school even, and kind of doesn't want to leave because he is the popular kid there. But really, I didn't see too much wrong with this movie. I thought it was very, very well executed. I do agree that the ending could have been a bit different. In fact, one of our regular podcast listeners, Tim, informed me that the ending to the book is basically the exact opposite of the ending of the movie. And I won't reveal what either one is, but I'm not sure how I would have felt if it went the other way. I sort of liked the way the movie ended, even if maybe every choice in it wasn't my favorite. But I really, really enjoyed this movie. It gets a very enthusiastic A- from me. Next up, we have Battle of the Year, and Justin's going to tell us about that one.
All right, so the general plotline of, as much as there is of Battle of the Year, focuses on this big tournament, and America hasn't won in about 15 years. So this businessman that was originally a b-boy, as the dancers are called in this, named Dante, recruits an old teammate of his named Blake to assemble a super team to head to the tournament in France, the Battle of the Year, obviously, and hopefully claim it back for Team US. Honestly, I consider this entire thing a waste of time. I have a hard enough time calling this a movie because I felt from the very, very start that it was basically a hour and 50-minute promo video. The dancing's good, I confess, but it just didn't have enough story to carry that in the slightest. The dialogue is horrid in the very sense of the word. I'm baffled as to whether or not there was a script. The 3D feels like an obnoxious afterthought. That said, for niche audiences of dancing, this might be worth watching. I can't say, that's never been my thing, but yet that's probably the nicest thing I can say about Battle of the Year without going too far into it. It just narrowly scrapes by an F. Battle of the Year gets a D-. Dan?
Well, I will argue one point with you. I thought the 3D was actually really good in this. I think here is an example of 3D utilized properly. The dance sequences were easily the best part of the movie because it was the only part of the movie where nobody was talking. And I thought that the Battle of the Year scenes, they went on a little long because dancing isn't really my thing, but I thought the 3D actually was pretty good in it. However, that being said, this movie truly uses only every cliche in the book, both for dance movies and sports movies in general. Chris Brown is in it, which automatically lowers my grade. I despise the man. I hate all of his faces and his mugging, and every time he opened his mouth, I wanted to hit him. The acting in general is terrible. The script is anemic. However, there are some cool dance sequences. I am a Josh Holloway fan. He was in Lost. He plays the coach here. He was trying, so I got to give him that. I also agree that it doesn't necessarily deserve an F, but it will get my second lowest grade, which is a straight D. And Joe, you didn't see the movie in full, but you did see a few scenes. Does that kind of ring true to what you saw?
Yeah, pretty much. Really, I just thought it was incredibly corny. That's like the biggest thing I got off my general impression. Though I do agree that I thought that the lead actor was doing as much as he could with very limited material. I thought he was honestly trying, and I kind of liked his performance, even though everything he said was incredibly cliche.
It was right out of the playbook.
I thought the dancing was really awesome, though. I'll be honest. I mean, I don't know much about it, but it did look cool. So that's all I really have to say about it.
Yeah. I don't watch those all dancing shows like the Best Dance Crew or whatever, but whenever there is a dance act on America's Got Talent where they only get 90 seconds to perform, I'm enthralled. A whole movie I can do without, but, I did think some of the dancing was cool. All right, finally on our new release docket this week, we have Instructions Not Included. Now, this was one of the biggest surprises of the year industry-wise. It's a Spanish-language movie that opened in 5th place a couple of weeks ago with about $10 million, which is beyond impressive considering it was playing in less than 1/6 the number of theaters that almost every other movie in the top 10 was playing in.
Wow.
Valentine, a player not unlike Don Jon actually, learns that one of his conquests named Julie gave birth to a baby girl named Maggie a few months ago, and when she drops by to tell him the news, she also leaves Maggie with him for good. Completely unaware and unwilling to raise a baby himself, he tracks Julie to the U.S. and ends up staying there and finding out that he actually loves being a parent. Until Julie tracks him down again and complicates things, which is where the movie starts to take a turn. I thought the film started out strong, although the comedy was pretty scattershot. But the plot worked for me, and both Eugene Derbez, or Derbe, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, and Loreto Peralta as Valentine and Maggie, respectively, are very good here. Around the time Maggie's mom shows back up, though, like I said, it starts to fall apart, and it falls hard. Reminiscent of even the worst Medea movies, Instructions sweeps wildly from hard-hitting dramatic scenes to broad comedy bits in those same moments, and it's just awkward. You add in a very messy final few scenes, and the whole thing, for me, just was not worth it at all. Instructions Not Included gets a D+. Justin?
Oh, wow. There's a history today of you being harsher than me on movies.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay.
I saw some bad ones.
Here goes. All right, so out of everything being reviewed this time around on the podcast, this is by far the most frustrating one for me to talk about. I admit I laughed. I thought it was funny in parts, but only consistently for about a third halfway in. Before and after that was either very inconsistent or just predictable, or some variation between the two.
Very predictable.
Oh my
gosh.
Jokes,
yeah.
Painfully.
Absolutely.
The storyline is incredibly familiar. It goes into the unlikely adult that's a goofball, learns to be a parent, and the child helps them, and it's goofy, and it tries to be dramatic. Sort of like Big Daddy and Uncle Buck. And to be fair, it's relatively successful in what it wants to do until about the last 10 minutes, where it becomes a melodramatic mess, which is a pity because that just ended up being the main reason that this got bumped from what was supposed to be a B- to a C.
It sounds to me like this was kind of a disappointment to both of you. Why do you think it did so well?
I think because there are relatively 0 Spanish language movies released in the U.S. on a wide scale. Mm-hmm. And as you probably know, the Hispanic population just keeps booming. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because our theater plays a lot of Bollywood movies. Mm-hmm. But I don't think Spanish moviegoers have a lot of options in their native language. And this wasn't 100% in Spanish. I would say it was probably about 80-85%. Mm-hmm. But I just don't think they have a lot of options. And so when this went to initially 300 theaters and then eventually close to 1,000 theaters, the word sort of spread. And I will say this. There were definitely some of the things that Justin and I found fairly predictable that we didn't necessarily laugh at. The other members of the audience, who I believe were probably all Spanish, were laughing at. So it may be something where something that seems familiar and something that we've seen before in sitcoms or whatever is maybe a breath of fresh air to them. I don't know.
That could be just a language or a cultural barrier to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely.
I completely agree.
Do you guys think that there should be more Spanish films available?
I really do. I think there should be more foreign films available, just generally speaking.
At the full spectrum.
Indeed.
But I do think that if you're going to hit an underserved community, it is absolutely the Hispanic population. Because you'll notice that whenever a Vin Diesel movie comes out, for example, you'll get the breakdown of the ethnicities, and it's like 35 to 40% of the audience was Hispanic. And so, this is a group of people that loves going to the movies, and I just don't think there's a lot for them. That's a good question, though. I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
All right, well, that wraps up our new release docket for this week, so let's move on to our top 5. And this time around, like we talked about earlier, it is all about 3D. Now, we're not talking about the movies themselves, but just specifically how good the 3D was in the film. And so we're going to do our numbers 5 through 2 and then go around and give our number 1s. And Justin, we'll start with you for this. What were some of your favorite 3D moments on screen?
All right, number 5 goes to Hugo. I thought this was a wonderful film that complemented the actual spirit of the story through 3D, and it marries this whimsical fantasy with the gorgeous early formats of 1900s France, and really ties it together well with a 3D to bring a unique experience that eventually ended up showing its face at Oscar season, and I completely see why. It was a really great movie. Number 4 was How to Train Your Dragon. I'll be honest, when I saw this movie, I had absolutely no faith in this actually being good. I was dragged by a friend, and I was completely floored. I thought it was a huge surprise, especially with 3D. It throws the audience into the action, and it truly is what I think 3D ought to be. Just expanding the overall atmosphere of the story and making the audience feel as if they are a part of it. Number 3 was Oz the Great and Powerful, and this goes into a lot of the same reasons as How to Train Your Dragon. It really looks and feels like Oz. The way it respects the original, yet still being its own movie, lends itself well. The way director Sam Raimi uses montages and crosscuts and things like that really blends well with the 3D, and especially with the aspect ratio change, where it goes from this sort of a square overall look of the film to expanding into a more...
It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
It is probably the
screen.
best effect of 3D thus far, at least for this year in 3D. Really great stuff. Number 2, I have to give to Wreck-It Ralph. If there's ever an animated movie that has a perfect atmosphere for 3D, it is probably this movie. The diversity of the worlds in it definitely helped, but the main reason I wanted to leave this so high was because of the short that was attached to it, Paperman. Obviously, I can't lend that to this as a actual full-length feature film, but this was a wonderful short that really made great use of 3D, transitioning from 2D animation to 3D animation seamlessly and complementing it in a way that truly works.
All right, Joe, we'll go to you next.
Wow, very well said. My first one, number 5, would actually be Oz the Great and Powerful. I think Justin really hit it on the head. I think when it comes to atmosphere, it's one of my favorite aspects of a film, and really, this 3D really helped build the world of Oz. I really enjoyed it. Just how it enhanced the sets and really just brought you in. I thought it really enhanced everything. I thought it was amazing. My number 4 would be Tron Legacy. Visually, this movie was just fantastic, hands down. And I thought that really re-envisioning all the classic moments with modern technology, it just looked great. It is probably some of the best special effects I've ever seen for computer-generated imagery, and the 3D just kind of added to that. Amazing. Amazing looking. Number 3 would be How to Train a Dragon. You felt like you were flying. That's all I really need to say. It was just beautiful film, well done story, and once again, 3D really enhanced it. And my number 2 would be something we saw very recently, and that would be Dread. Just some of the best 3D I've ever seen, the enhancing the slow motion shots, the blood flying at you slowly. Admittedly a bit grisly, but just really, really added to the stylistic elements of the film that I thought really made it stand out. One of the brilliant aspects of it that made it a great movie. Great 3D for Dredd.
And we're going to talk about Dredd in full on next week's show, because that is our new classic, so I can't wait to get into that. I saw it in 3D as well, and it was cool. Yeah, Tron Legacy just narrowly missed the movie itself I didn't think was that great. I think I gave it a C when it came out, but the 3D was awesome in Tron Legacy, so I will give you that. Some of my choices will be a bit familiar, but my first two we have not heard yet. My number 5 is Life of Pi. I don't think Ang Lee does anything without going 110%. I thought the visual aspects of Life of Pi, much like Hugo the year before it, which was nominated for pretty much all of the technical awards at the Oscars and won many of them, Life of Pi was the same this year. Ang Lee really created this great world. The book has been called unfilmable so many times, and he found a way to film it not only well, but beautifully. So that was my number 5, and I thought the 3D was real cool in that. My number 4 might be a bit of a surprise. It's Katy Perry, Part of Me 3D. And let me tell you the reason for that. I really think that concerts are a great use of 3D technology. Just like people that have 3D TVs love the 3D sports channels. I think watching something like a concert film in 3D really puts you in that front row, and you're watching Katy Perry. I mean, it was basically not that much different from the One Direction 3D or the Justin Bieber 3D. They're all pretty cool. I thought the staging of the Katy Perry concert was a little better, and that sort of lent itself to 3D usage. And something that I also really enjoyed in that movie and the other 3D concert movies I mentioned is sometimes with the 3D movie, I sort of get so immersed in the story and sort of used to the 3D that it kind of goes away for me after a little bit, maybe 10 or 15 minutes into the movie. I kind of forget that it's even there. And with the concert movies, obviously the old footage of the singer and the home video stuff can't be in 3D. So it goes from 2D to 3D back to 2D, and it goes back and forth. And so anytime it goes back into the 3D, it's sort of like another quick shot of, oh yeah, this 3D is awesome, I'm really into this. So that's why I put Katy Perry at my number 4. My number 3 is Oz the Great and Powerful. Not much more needs to be said here. The other two guys had it on their list, and with great reason. Number 2 is also a repeat from both Justin and Joe's lists, and that's How to Train Your Dragon. I went into this one, much like Justin, completely not knowing if it was even going to be a decent movie, let alone one of the best films of the year. And the 3D in that was the best I've ever seen on an animated film. Certainly the first animated film that really made me say, wow. This is before I worked for the movie theater. I paid twice to see it in 3D. It was that good. And I will say, as sort of an honorable mention, A Christmas Carol 3D from a few years ago. But because that was more of the motion capture stuff than the 3D stuff, I sort of have to not put it on the list due to that. But that was another example of a great animated use of 3D, I thought. Justin, what was your number 1 3D film?
My number 1, and people may consider this a safe choice, but was James Cameron's Avatar. Alright, now I know everyone has their opinions about that, but let's be honest. James Cameron invented the technology for 3D, and he brought it to such gorgeous and brilliant use with this movie. Storyline, say what needs to be said, but he created a world that truly felt alive. I thought it was expansive. I thought it can almost be a little overwhelming given the running time, but it just came together so well, and I'll be honest, I am ecstatic to see what he's going to do to expand on this in 2016 when Avatar 2 hits.
Joe?
My number 1 is James Cameron's Avatar.
There it is.
I really have to say, when I saw this movie, it just really captivated me, and I love a good sci-fi film, and as Justin said, there are issues with it, but it's a good story, and you really, really do feel like you're on an alien world, and the scenery is just gorgeous. All the details to the Na'vi and the animals and the plants, it's just amazing. The element of detail, it's so expansive, and dare I say it, it really adds to the feeling of an epic story. And I loved it. It was engaging, and I wish I could see it in theaters again.
Well, you'll probably have that chance when Avatar 2 comes out. They'll probably do a marathon or a re-release at least for a week or something.
Hopefully.
I don't think it's any sort of surprise that my number one is James Cameron's Avatar. I said it earlier in the show, James Cameron is the master when it comes to 3D. He did a great job with the Titanic retrofit, and Avatar is one of the few examples where 3D has bumped my grade up significantly. I thought the story was very basic and uninteresting, and the 3D, the atmosphere, everything about the visualization of that movie pushed it from a C+ to a B+ for me. An entire letter grade higher, basically just for the 3D aspect. Anybody that missed Avatar in 3D when they saw it in theaters is truly, truly missing out. I do hope that we get another chance to see it in 3D. I actually haven't seen the movie since because I know that I will be bored if I'm watching it on a television set or on my computer or something, because like I said, I didn't find the story that engaging. However, everything else was, so I was engaged. And that is my number one. All right, we're going to move on now to our triple feature that we do each week. We have our new classic, which is a recently released movie from the last 2 years that Justin and I both thought very highly of, and we show it to Joe sometimes for the first time. This one he had seen before. We also have our old classic, which we sort of rotate who gets to pick that. And it was me this week. I did Mike Judge's Extract. And then finally we had our Oscar nominee, which was Absence of Malice. First up, though, we're going to start with the Ides of March, which was our new classic for this week. And Joe, tell us about that.
All right. Ryan Gosling plays Stephen Myers, who is a campaign worker for George Clooney, in this case, Governor Mike Myers, who is the presidential candidate in the upcoming election. And essentially things are going pretty well. Ryan Gosling is a fairly idealistic character, and everything is all right until he meets with Paul Giamatti, who is a worker from the rival campaign. This basically spirals things down into a scandal, which results in Mike losing his job. And he ultimately finds himself kind of dealing both sides, and a relationship with an intern kind of spices things up even more. Overall, I really enjoyed this film. I think a good political drama is always a great thing. And George Clooney does a pretty good job writing and directing this, and of course the performances are great. You've got an all-star cast here. You've got George Clooney, Ryan Gosling, who has actually been growing on me recently. I've seen him in a couple films. He is pretty good. I think he's getting better. And of course, Marisa Tomei, some of my favorites, Paul Giamatti, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Just great cast overall, and they really have some great dialogue. And I really kind of like how this film captures that dark underbelly of politics we all know is there. This is all stuff that is, once again, very believable. I could see these things happening. And it delves into some really tragic stuff, and the cloak and dagger elements are just really, really great. The only thing I think that holds it back from getting an excellent grade for me is the fact that I kind of didn't like the moral elements in turn for Ryan Gosling's character, the direction he went. I didn't personally like that. Not necessarily saying it says anything against the writing, because it was pretty excellent overall, fairly solid, I would say.
Yeah.
But I just didn't like the moral direction. I didn't like the message it was sending, despite the fact that it was well written. I also felt that the first two acts of the film were incredibly well paced, but the third act I felt like we could have, once again, kind of like Don Jon, had a little more added. I thought that the ending was a bit abrupt for me. Overall, though, I really enjoyed the film, and I would settle with giving it a B+.
Very good. I will point out one thing. The George Clooney governor character is Mike Morris, not Mike Myers. That would be the International Man of Mystery.
Did I say Myers?
Yeah, but that's because Ryan Gosling's character is Stephen Myers.
Oh.
So he had Myers on the brain.
Well, I guess that he's kind of rivaling as a serial killer, then.
I guess so.
Yeah,
Michael Myers. But anyway, I completely agree with a lot of what you had to say there. I think George Clooney played one of the most perfect fictional politicians on film in recent years. If the election were tomorrow, I'd vote for him. He was really, really good in the role. Ryan Gosling is good as always. I'm actually surprised to hear that you weren't much of a fan until recently. I think he's definitely one of the good up-and-comers here. I was shocked when he didn't get nominated for Drive, which came out right around the same time as the Ides of March. I think one of Philip Seymour Hoffman's strongest suits, just in general, is his great monologuing. And he has the opportunity to do a few of them in this movie that just are real standouts. I think the script is well put together, and Clooney has definitely found his directorial style. I think it works for him. He's not as good of a director as his pal Ben Affleck, but he's definitely competent. I've seen, I think, 3 of his directed films now, and I think this is probably the best one yet of them. I think it's pretty well paced. I did think that it started out a little bit slow until we sort of got to know what exactly was going down with the different characters. It's also not completely original as far as political thrillers go, but it was very engaging, and I think great actors can take even moderate characters a long way. And, I mean, you read off the names. This one has a fantastic cast list. I also give the Ides of March a B+. Justin?
This is really one of those movies that benefits from the 2 leads. Clooney, who plays, as Dan put it, just this incredibly charismatic candidate for the presidency, and Ryan Gosling, both have this really cool exterior that we seem to be drawn to, but deep down we all know that these people have something to hide in this dark political underbelly, as Joe put it. Thanks to both of their performances, what could have been a really dry political drama thriller ends up becoming really engaging and becoming a suspenseful, cutthroat story into how far one might actually end up going to protect one's image for votes. I'm not quite sure if this was the cynicism that Clooney wanted this to have in actuality, but I'll be honest, this was a really, really good movie. This is another one I went in with relatively low expectations. I was still remembering Leatherheads, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was not the fault of Clooney's directing, but Leatherheads was an awful movie. Please don't see it.
But other than that, I thought this was a very, very, very well put together movie. I do see Joe and Dan's point that it dragged a little bit at the start, and maybe it could have benefited from a couple more minutes to hash some things out. But overall, well worth a watch. Ides of March, much like my castmates, gets a B+.
I enjoyed it more the second time. I think when I originally saw it, I gave it a B, and watching it the second time, I have to bump it up a little bit, because it's still, even though you know what happens, it's still very engaging.
I felt the same way, actually.
Yeah.
It could definitely do with some multiple viewings.
Yeah, I agree. All right, next up we've got our old classic, which was chosen by me this week. It's the 3rd Mike Judge film following his cult hits Office Space and Idiocracy. This one finds Jason Bateman heading up a cast of familiar faces, including Mila Kunis, Kristen Wiig, J.K. Simmons, and Ben Affleck. Bateman stars as Joel Reynolds, the owner and operator of a flavoring extracts company who's going through some issues at home, namely he and his wife, played by Wiig, haven't had sex in months, and also at work, namely in the midst of a possible buyout and huge payday for him. One of his best workers has a very unfortunate workplace accident, leaving the future of his entire company in jeopardy. Mila Kunis shows up as a new temp for the company, whose ulterior motive is to align herself with the injured worker and share in his possible enormous payday from a lawsuit. Justin and Joe had both not seen this film before, so I'd like to hear from you guys first. Justin, what did you think of Extract?
All right. With Extract, just knowing Mike Judge, this is a movie that has 2 very, very difficult acts to follow. It's definitely nowhere near as clever and satirical as Office Space and Idiocracy, but the strange thing is it contains elements of both. And despite the fact that it might seem a little bit safe, it's still relatively funny to me. I was surprised at how much I was actually laughing. I'm not a big Kristen Wiig fan, but some moments with her, especially at the end, were absolutely hysterical. The star power, I have to confess, I did not think was put to best use. I think some were hit or miss. Mila Kunis had some spots that were kind of funny, other parts were just there. But for just playing in between the lines a little bit, very well worth a look if you just are looking for a quick laugh. Extract gets a B-.
Always so harsh on the comedy, Justin. Joe, what'd you think?
Well, I'm sure it's no secret to you guys, but the audience might not know. I'm a huge Mike Judge fan. His comedy is just so witty, it's so smart, but also so down to earth. It's that incredible blend, and he can hit so many different areas. And I kind of, like Justin touched upon, I sensed elements of all his work. I sensed a little bit of Office Space, some of the Office banner, the corporate jargon. There was some of the King of the Hill, some hillbilly humor in there. There was some blue-collar humor as well. There was a little bit of Beavis and Butthead.
I was going to say, the T.J. Miller character is like a grown-up butthead, basically.
It was kind of a small element, but there was a little bit of Beavis and Butthead there, and I thought that was kind of cool. And of course, there was some play on Idiocracy, just some of the dumb characters in this film. But there were a lot of great actors, and they had some great lines to read. There were just so many funny moments in this movie. I will admit, yes, the plot's a little safer than some of his previous works, but it was pretty genuinely funny. I think in terms of actual quality as a comedy, I think that I'd probably give it like a B, B+, but I really enjoyed this, and maybe just because I really like Mike Judge's humor, I would actually give it an A-.
I think that's a perfectly acceptable grade for a film of this caliber.
Thank you, Dan.
As odd as some of the characters are, they're all very true to life, and I think that's what Judge specializes in. He has these characters that are just odd enough to seem unreal, but down to earth enough to be completely somebody that you might know
Well said.
or encounter on a day-to-day basis. And I think Mike Judge is sort of the black sheep of the cult comedy world. I mean, he, to me, is as gifted a writer as Trey Stone and Matt Parker, who, I mean, I love South Park. I love their movie work. I feel like Mike Judge is on that level of just really capturing what's funny and what's real and what's bizarre and sort of blending it all together. Ben Affleck puts in a hilarious turn here. And also, Gene Simmons, who shows up in a couple of scenes,
JK.
is just outlandishly hilarious here as the injured worker's lawyer. Basically, it is sort of Office Space in a different type of work setting. And how could it possibly be as good as Office Space? It can't. But it is definitely, I think, a very, very clever comedy. And for me, Extract gets a B+. Justin, to your point about Mila Kunis, to be fair, she's the least funny character in the whole movie. I don't think... I mean, first of all, she's not very likable as a character. And I don't think he picked Mila Kunis necessarily for her comedic chops. She can be funny. I mean, that 70s show she's obviously funny in. But I don't think it's a role that was specifically... I don't know if another actress could have done it much better. I mean, would you agree with that?
The problem with her character was she was sort of like the moving causal agent of everything that was ending up happening. I thought that, yes, her character wasn't necessarily supposed to be funny, but her character was also supposed to be this sort of like darkly comedic person. As you said, she's not very likable, and unlikable characters aren't necessarily... You're not supposed to root for them, but I mean, I know you're a huge Bad Teacher fan, so you tell me on that one.
I do love Bad Teacher, that's correct, and I was very conflicted by that movie, as you know, because it was hilarious, but she isn't a very likable character, so I do agree with that.
And I mean, on that same point, I sort of agree with you in terms of Mila Kunis' character in this movie. I just felt like there were opportunities for her to be hilarious, and instead she was just giving minor chuckles or just smirks.
But do you think it's because the material that her character had is not that funny, or do you think, like, can you think of another actress that you would say would have been funnier in the role?
Or perhaps a method of delivery.
Honestly, even though I know you may have gone back and forth earlier this year about it, Olivia Wilde probably could have rocked this role just going off of her role in Butter.
I do like that movie, Butter. Olivia Wilde's sort of an oddity for me because I do think she's a good actress. I don't know if she's that funny, though. Joe, what do you think of the Mila Kunis character?
I actually thought that her character...
Or her performance, I guess I should say.
I thought her character was decent. I mean, yes, it's kind of just someone who's supposed to keep the plot moving. I think that what worked with her for me was just the situational stuff. The actions and the situation, the people she bounced off were funny. I'm not sure if she really could have added more or less. I thought she was funny, and I really don't like Mila Kunis that much. So for her to give me some laughs, I think was a positive thing.
And I think, I mean, her character, though isn't supposed to be likable, is sort of the crux for everything that happens in the film. Without her character, there's basically no film because there's no struggle. So...
There was a point that we brought up towards the end of the film that I kind of wanted to touch upon, and that was actually her character's development. I believe, Justin, you believe that she did develop at all, and I think Dan and I kind of saw that a different way.
Oh, she definitely developed as a character.
Well...
Not particularly.
But you don't think so?
Well, I think kind of, but Justin, I think you might have something to say about that.
Not really. I mean, she's she's by nature a comically despicable character, and that doesn't really change at all throughout the entire movie. We only get one moment where she's even semi-sympathetic, and even then the audience has the feeling of she might as well just get caught and actually have something horrible happen to her for a change. And they do try to wrap up what happens to her in an epilogue, but it just still feels like more of the same. She's still going out there doing goofy things. We don't feel like she's made any progress. We don't feel like she's developed at all. She feels like a walking plot device. She's a plot device that has entertaining and comedic elements, but still a walking plot device.
I don't know. I kind of thought that there was a moment where basically when she is confronted, she does give back some of the stolen goods, and later on she kind of just aims these tendencies at bad people, kind of a Robin Hood thing. So I kind of thought that was a nod at some development. Minor though it may be. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the scene you mentioned where she does give back goods that were stolen from some of the extract workers really did show a different side to her. If not, a changed person completely, at least felt sympathy for Jason Bateman's character and wanted to help him out because it's his company and she didn't want to see it go down the tubes because of something she did.
That was probably the one moment that I'll agree with you on. That was probably the only reason she actually did end up doing that.
Yeah.
I don't think it was a matter of personal would she have done that otherwise at all.
No, probably not. But that's how people develop, based on things around them and people saying things to them.
Like I said, it was a minor turn of development, but I still thought it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. All right, let's move on to our final film, and that is Absence of Malice. Now, this is a 1981 movie that was nominated for Best Actor, Supporting Actress for Melinda Dillon, and Best Original Screenplay. Paul Newman here plays Michael Gallagher, a liquor store wholesaler who finds himself on the front page of the local newspaper as a person of interest in a murder investigation, which is complete news to him. And he confronts the person who wrote the story, Megan Carter, who's played by Sally Field. And the two go back and forth for a while, Megan refusing to reveal her source, and all the while she strikes up an unlikely and probably inappropriate romantic relationship with Michael. I thought this movie had a lot of good layers to it. I was a bit surprised, actually, that Sally Field didn't also get a supporting or a Best Actress nomination. Dillon, who plays Michael's girlfriend in the movie, she was only in a few scenes and she got a supporting actress nomination. She's good, but I thought it was a fantastic performance from Sally Field, honestly. I think some of Megan's behavior is a bit odd and questionable, but I think Sally Field does very well with it. The screenplay was good. It was up for Best Screenplay, and I definitely think it was a decent screenplay. It's not too dated. Even the phrases that are being said aren't patently 80s or anything. Something I thought was interesting was, other than the technology and the fact that, in this movie it was done on really old school computers and with a newspaper as opposed to having a blog or something, nothing about the story would be different if you did the movie today. The characters would be exactly the same. The basic premises would be exactly the same 30 years later. And I think that really is a testament of a good script. So I really enjoyed Absence of Malice. Sally Field's character, like I said, went through a couple of really odd choices, definitely some inappropriate relationship stuff for her job anyway. But overall, I give Absence of Malice a B. Joe?
I think the thing about this film I like the most is that it really is taking a subject that is really fun to tackle, and that is just the importance of journalism in relation to people's lives, particularly criminal investigations. And I like the fact that Paul Newman's character really turns the table on everyone involved, because it starts off as one cycle, and as you said, it's very, very layered. I won't give much away, but everyone's involved. The newspaper's involved, the DA's involved, the police are involved, and the witnesses are involved. And it's just really kind of cool how all these characters interact, and it really, really was quite fascinating. And I have to say that there were some really cool stylistic shots in this movie. I think there was one that we saw, Justin pointed out, where you're seeing these two people meet with the cars facing in opposite directions, and you see one reflection of the other person. Yeah,
that was a really cool shot.
And then the camera slowly pans out to kind of see this different perspective on both of them. That's just a really cool shot that you never see. I thought that was really awesome. There were also some really, really great one-liners. Like, there was the legal defense for the paper at the beginning of the movie just gave this speech, and it was just really, really great. I mean, I was laughing. It was just Really, really
Well,
great
and
dialogue.
Wilford Brimley towards the end of the movie. I'm sure you were going to get to that, but talk about great lines.
Dan, you stole
Sorry,
it.
sorry.
You stole it. I was building up to it, man, but it's okay. We were all going to mention him at some point. I will say, this movie was good, but it was kind of iffy, kind of going up and down a bit for me, but it really wraps up really, really well in the last, 10, 15 minutes of that third act. Mostly because of Wilford Brimley just kind of coming out of nowhere and setting things straight. He just does such a great job. I really liked it. And he delivers those lines that I mentioned. They were so great. This dry wit that I love. And there were also some other actors, too, that just did a great job. I think that Newman did a really good job, though. I have to admit, I agree with you. I think Sally Field was honestly the best actor in the movie. I do agree her character made some questionable choices. That was one of the weaker elements of the script. Her kind of being really an awesome journalist, but her personal relationships were a bit questionable. And she kind of almost had like a split personality. Still, her line delivery was amazing. Great performance. Overall, I did enjoy it, but once again, I thought that it was a bit flimsy. But just for the stylistic elements of the camera work, the great performances, and that really solid third act, and dealing with some really cool elements of that topic of journalism, I would give it a solid B. It was a good movie.
And everything really does seem pretty, not basic, but it sort of just seems like, okay, well, here it is. It's in your face. You know what's happening. And then they just keep peeling back the layers of, who's involved in what and everything. And Brimley sure gets to the bottom of it at the end.
He ties it all together for the audience.
Yes, he does. Justin, Absence of Malice, what'd you think?
You got to give it up to director Sidney Pollack. He knows how to direct a movie, and more importantly, he knows how to direct his actors to get the best out of them. And with Sally Fields, much like you guys said, phenomenal job. I'm shocked, if not floored, that she did not get a nomination in this role.
She was so good in this movie.
I don't get it.
And the way that she plays off Paul Newman, who, I'll be honest, I have never seen him do a bad job in a movie.
And there is none.
He's excellent.
Exactly. And I will just leave it at that. The problem here is the fact that, like you two have also said, the narrative goes off in a number of odd directions. Fields does great given her role in the script, but the problem is the script doesn't seem to want to decide if she's going to be this strong, independent journalist trying to figure out what exactly is going on here, or if she's going to just be the essential love interest to Paul Newman's character. And
I feel that's why she didn't get nominated.
Which I agree with. However, I also feel like that's a big issue with the script, which is why the fact that she got robbed of that nomination and the screenplay got nominated
I don't get
is confusing to me. It's still a very good movie, and like you said, there's some phenomenal cinematography in scenes, and it's still got very good elements to it. It's just, it's not as good as some of his other stuff like Out of Africa and Absence of Malice, much like Dan, gets a B.
We all give it a solid B.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, you did too.
It's okay.
Don't you think, though, about the screenplay that it really is sort of timeless in its... Today it might be on, Huffington Post or something instead of the morning paper, but everything surrounding it would still be basically the same. And I think that does speak to a good screenplay.
It does. However, I know at the time this got nailed constantly for the fact that no journalist would act like Sally Field's character. However, she still portrays her character in a very strong manner that, while it may not have credibility, I mean, look at Hurt Locker, where almost every veteran I've talked to has slammed Jeremy Renner's performance for going solo in the third act.
In terms of Absence of Malice, I think that maybe one reason that it kind of suffers... I'm not entirely sure it's actually the script was entirely at fault. I mean, there are some elements with Sally Field's character primarily, and the narrative does kind of bob and weave at the directions they want to take the story, but they do kind of tie it in towards the end. So it's a pretty strong script. I think what might be distracting is some of the tone, because Justin made a point about, for instance, some of the transitions, like with the newspaper reels, basically kind of making it a little more corny and distracting, and that did happen quite a bit. I don't know if it'd say it bombarded us, but that might have been one thing that kind of threw people off.
It became sort of episodic. It was like, okay, now we're going to go to this, now we're going to go to that. Cut to the newspapers. On to this part.
I guess basically going off of that, I think it might have made the narrative feel a little bit dysfunctional. Like it was kind of separate, just these separate instances, like you said, episodic. It didn't feel quite as tied together through maybe like the first act or two.
What about Melinda Dillon getting the supporting actress nomination? To me, her character was important, but as far as an acting job, I don't think it was anything that remarkable.
I thought it was
no offense to her.
I thought it was good. I thought it was okay for what it was. It's just I don't know what her competition was that year, so for all I know, it was a good performance in a year of mediocre supporting actress performances. So.
Okay.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you guys, I really didn't think she was that great.
Yeah, I mean, it's a throwaway, right?
I thought it was, at best, it was okay, but the fact that she was only on screen for like maybe 2 or 3 scenes, and her performance wasn't really anything that blew me away. To hear that she was nominated and the lead woman wasn't, that made absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah, to put her, I mean, her crucial scene is sitting and talking with Sally Field.
And if you play them
and
both against each other...
you put the two next to each other, and you're going to lose every time to Sally Field.
It's like, I don't know.
Sorry. All right, well, at least we all gave it the same grade, all pretty much on the same page with Absence of Malice.
It's good, we're just not entirely sure why.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be it for our show this week. Join us next week for another round of Film Fanatics. You can catch Joe's YouTube stuff on his page, which is Merlin Boss. Just type that in and you'll find all his videos, and you can always find us on Facebook at Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. That's our Facebook group, and our Twitter is at Film Fanatics Pod. You can follow us there and get all the updates for when the shows are available. Joe?
Oh, and a little shout out to one of our listeners. Hey Matt, thanks for listening. Keep tuning in. Spread the word.
Yeah, spread that word. Let's keep it going. We've got another great show for you next week, so thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.